Four of the most famous factions in the Star Wars universe go to war today as the Confederacy of Independent Systems teams up with their longtime rival, the Galactic Republic, to take on the Republic's successor state, the Empire, and the Rebel Alliance. Which side will come out on top? Find out on today's Star Wars Galactic Versus episode. Hey guys, this is EckhartsLadder. Hello and welcome to another episode of Star Wars Galactic Versus. We haven't had a full Galactic Versus episode in a while, so for those of you who aren't aware, in this series we take factions from either different or the same universe, put them head to head, and try to predict which one will come out on top. Today we have what I believe to be our first ever four-way battle, with the Republic and the Confederacy of Independent Systems from the prequel trilogy taking on the Rebel Alliance and the Empire from the original trilogy. Thank you to everyone who voted for this suggestion on the Discord. If you want to help choose the topic of future videos, make sure that you join the Discord as well. There's a link down in the description. Let's talk about rules for today's battle. We're assuming that two exact copies of the Star Wars universe, perhaps from different dimensions or timelines, have appeared next to each other. Warring factions within each galaxy have united in order to take on their new opponents. Each side will have access to all of the resources available to them, including starships, force sensitives, and super weapons. This means that both the Empire and the Republic are being ruled and controlled by Palpatine. The only real rule that I have in place is that no faction will be able to make use of knowledge of the past or the future. So, for example, Palpatine on the Empire side won't have any special knowledge of Republic hidden bases. Instead of looking at each faction individually, I'm going to separate this matchup into several categories, including resources, tech, Navy strength, then intangibles. So let's start with resources, and keep in mind that we're considering the CIS and the Republic as one, and the Empire and the Alliance as one. Also, just for further clarity, we'll take the two prequel trilogy factions at the time of the Battle of Coruscant, and we'll take the two original trilogy factions at the time of the second Death Star battle. So resources are obviously very important when it comes to fighting a large-scale war. Speaking generally, I believe the combined might of the Alliance and the Empire actually has an advantage here. However, this is mostly the Empire doing the heavy lifting. After the Republic died and the Empire formed, Palpatine very heavily militarized all Imperial assets. This is everything from procuring new starships to further expanding the reach of the Empire, and the total worlds controlled by the Empire was actually greater than those controlled by both the Confederacy and the Republic combined. It is notable, however, that the Empire's control was far more core-centric than that of the combined Separatists and Republic. That's because while the Republic controlled much of the core of the galaxy, the Separatists were happy to stay among the mid and outer rims. However, going back to the benefits of the Empire, the political structure created by Palpatine really lends itself well to efficient wartime use of resources. At this point, there would have been no Imperial Senate, there were no political hang-ups preventing the use of resources, and really the military commanders could get basically anything that they needed. Once Palpatine assumed full power, besides for just militarizing any current resources, he also invested heavily in research and development. From the Maw Cluster to hundreds of thousands of other research bases around the galaxy, the Empire was consistently inventing and discovering new technologies. I'll get to that later when I talk about tech, but just generally the governing and political structure of the Empire, in other words basically an authoritarian dictatorship versus a democratic republic, makes the management of resources much easier. Again, even just ignoring the Rebel Alliance, it's my opinion that the Empire is larger even than the Republic and the Confederacy combined, and the systems that they hold with a much tighter grip. They have easy access to resources, so I give this category to the original trilogy factions. Now we have tech, and there are 10,000 things I could talk about in this section. I will try to mention some of the key ones, but I can't get to everything. The biggest and most important pieces of tech for the Empire also could be talked about in the military section, but I will mention them here. The greatest asset that the Empire has available to it is the Death Star 2. Given that we're taking the Empire just basically minutes before the Battle of Endor, this station was fully functional and easily capable of destroying a planet. Also, given the vast resources of the Empire and their knowledge of the Death Star construction plans, arguably if the war goes on, they could produce further battle stations. The Separatists do have their own quasi-super weapons, most notably the Malevolence-class cruisers and their ion cannons, but those aren't nearly the kind of game changers that a Death Star is, and as I've mentioned in previous videos, I think that their usefulness will be limited when facing larger enemies. I will talk about the different design philosophies between especially the Republic and the Empire when it comes to navies later on, but one thing I do want to mention is that the Empire has the capacity to make very large, very powerful ships. We know especially of Executor-class super star destroyers. The Empire also had other dreadnoughts and other battlecruiser types. The Republic and the Confederacy very rarely were able to produce ships of this size and had literally nothing that could rival an Executor. Tech-wise, the Empire also has various special weapons projects, none of which I think individually will be a game changer to the extent of, say, a Super Star Destroyer or a Death Star, but many of which will help them win individual battles. Generally, I will say, and I know I'm focusing a lot on the Galactic Empire for the original trilogy factions, but the Rebel Alliance's addition in this scenario are relatively minor. But generally, I think that Imperial weapons tech in both starfighter design and ground technology has actually regressed. Certainly the TIE fighter wasn't up to snuff when compared with any of the fighters used during the Clone Wars, with the exception perhaps of the droid starfighter. Also on the ground, things like AT-ATs and AT-STs, while very frightening, aren't even as effective as ships and vehicles that the Republic used, for example the AT-TE or even something like the Juggernaut tank. I would also argue that clones are much more effective on the battleground, and especially clone special forces, than the Stormtrooper Corps of the Empire. The Empire did have its own special forces and its own commandos, but I think the training regime of the clones generally was much more well suited for large-scale war. On another note, one of the things that I should have mentioned in the economy section, but which can also apply to technology, is the fact that many of the Confederacy assets were imperialized, or in other words taken under control by the Empire after the Clone Wars. On an economy side, that results in things like the formation of the corporate sector authority, but on the tech side, that also gives the Empire the capacity to build starships and perhaps even droids that would have been used by the CIS, although they very rarely did so. Really, the technology here is just different. Obviously, the Empire and the Alliance do have several decades of technological advancement under their belt. However, the Empire especially used this technological advantage at a varied level. Obviously, they were able to make things like the Death Star, which wouldn't have been previously possible, but their starfighters were a dramatic step back. So I'll call this category a tie. So now we have military, and there are a few things that I'd like to talk about here. Chiefly the difference in military philosophy between the Empire especially and the Confederacy and the Republic, and then second, ship numbers. It's my belief that this war will be primarily won and lost in space, so that's what I'm going to focus on for this section. The Empire took a far different ship design philosophy when compared with the Republic. Republic ships were traditionally used as carriers, and the traditional Venator was much shorter and much less well-armed than its Imperial 1 or Imperial 2 counterpart. Something similar can be said of the Confederacy. The standard ship was much shorter and much less well-armed than an Imperial 2. Obviously that gives the Republic and the CIS some benefits. I mean, we know that Imperial ships are fairly vulnerable to strike craft and starfighters, so that's something to keep in mind. However, I would say the firepower difference between Imperial 2 class Star Destroyer and something like a Venator is quite damning, and especially when an Imperial 2 operates in fleets with smaller ships protecting against starfighters, the Empire truly has a very deadly navy. Key Imperial assets could also be bolstered with Rebel ones, so for example, an Imperial fleet with Star Destroyers could also have an MC-80 Home 1 type providing fighter cover. But still, just due to the comparative size difference, the Rebels' input into this scenario will be relatively minor. The dozens of dreadnoughts and battlecruisers of the Empire will also be difficult for the CIS and the Republic to deal with, although, again, using ships that can carry a lot of starfighters into battle will be one option. However, I just think generally, any victory gained by the Republic or the Confederacy will be one where they lose ships as well. Overall, when we look at numbers, it's quite difficult to decide which faction and which side actually has the advantage. I mean, given that the Empire grew from the Republic and that it presumably kept all of the Republic ships, that gives it a huge advantage, and we know that they also would have kept most of the Confederate ships, but by this point, many of those assets would have likely been either scrapped, lost, or directly upgraded into other ships. Really, the only notable Republic ships that would have still been in operation within the Empire by the time of the Battle of Endor, at least that we've seen, would have been the Imperator types, which sometimes operated as an early Imperial One, or the Victory-class Star Destroyer. Both ships saw a brief introduction towards the end of the Clone Wars. The Empire is clearly far more militarized than the Republic, but it's hard for me to say outright that it's more militarized than both the Republic and the Confederacy, even with the help of the Rebel Alliance. For that reason, and because we're looking at two different design philosophies, I'm going to call it a tie, but I do think the dreadnoughts and the battlecruisers of the Empire could be something that really turns the tide of the war. Now for intangibles, and the only thing I'd like to mention here is Force users. Obviously, the Republic will at this time have the benefit of thousands of Jedi Knights, while the Empire, on the other hand, will only have some. They'll have Sidious and Darth Vader, both who are Sith, not Jedi. They'll have Starkiller, they'll have Luke Skywalker, Yoda, and Obi-Wan, but besides that, they have Force sensitives, but not much else. And actually, come to think of it, Starkiller would be long dead by the time of the Battle of Endor anyway. Still, many, including members of the Shadow Hand or the Emperor's other advisors or officials, would have been Force users, although their numbers really pale in comparison to the Jedi. With that being said, who do I think will win? Well, I think that the weapons advantage of the Empire is going to be very difficult to overcome, especially with the Death Star. If we're putting two galaxies head-to-head in all-out war, I don't think the Emperor, in command of all of his resources, is going to have any sort of qualms about using the Death Star to destroy key planets. And it's going to be very difficult for the opposing factions to actually take down the Death Star, given that the Empire can protect it with several Super Star Destroyers, battle cruisers, Star Destroyers, and basically protect it with many of its resources. Although we're assuming that at the beginning of the war, the Emperor won't know key Republic and Sith locations, the Empire was very good at finding things out. And I can just imagine once he discovers Geonosis or Coruscant, bringing a very large fleet, complete with Super Star Destroyers and the Death Star, and just absolutely wiping the planets out, delivering critical blows to the prequel trilogy factions. The Empire is just so militarized, and it's so large. Besides for the Rebel Alliance, they had full control of millions of systems. I'm not saying the Sith and the Republic weren't also impressive in their own right, but the production capability, the logistics, and just the sheer amount of military assets available to the Empire is basically unprecedented in the Star Wars universe. I see the Death Star being an absolutely key asset in this war. I mean, give it to Thrawn, although he probably wouldn't want it, with a small fleet or even a large fleet, and just basically have it going through the Republic and wreaking havoc. I'm fairly confident that the Empire, through sheer firepower, will be able to dominate either faction in space. Their only real difficulty will be dealing with Jedi generals, who we know brought the war to the Confederacy during the Clone Wars in a very effective way. They could easily turn the tide of battle on either ground or in space, but I think mostly due to sheer weapons and firepower, numbers, and secret projects that the Empire will be able to make up for that intangible. The Alliance will have a very small role in this scenario, perhaps operating incognito within Republic/Confederate space, doing strike missions, but not really participating in the larger war, except maybe as a part of a single Imperial fleet. So I'll give this battle to the original trilogy factions, and I think they win 7.5 times out of 10. The Empire's tools of war are just almost unmatched, and with the ability to create more Death Stars, things like battle cruisers and Super Star Destroyers, I just think the Empire is almost unbeatable in space, even with the help of Jedi, droids, anything that the prequel trilogies have available to them. I know what you're wondering, how then did the puny Rebel Alliance manage to defeat them? That all comes down to Palpatine's overconfidence when facing the Rebels, his miscalculations regarding the Skywalkers and Darth Vader in particular, but I'll talk all about that in a dedicated video. For now, let me know what you thought of this one down in the comments. Did I get this one right? Did I get it wrong? Do you think the prequel trilogy would stomp the original trilogy, or the opposite like I do? Let me know all of that and more down in the comments section. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, guys. As always, this has been your host, EckhartsLadder. Thank you very much to Freight Train for helping me edit this video, and I say helping me edit, he did all of it. Make sure to check out his channel. I'll put that up in the annotations at the end of the video and down in the description box below. He really deserves it, guys. Anyways, thank you so much again. May the Force be with you.